is loving, it's forgiving, it's gracious, and it's kind. And we want to please him. And we know that what he wants for us is always better than what we want for ourselves. So therefore, I'm going to live intentionally in my discipleship and learn from my mistakes so that I can become all that Jesus is asking me to be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Practice. And this is episode 5. And I'm really quite excited in many respects today because I've got my son with me, Caleb.
Hello.
And we're going to be talking about a number of things today. And for me personally, it's just really a blessing to be able to do this with him. And hopefully it'll be a blessing for you guys as well as you watch along or listen along to this podcast. So, Caleb, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about who you are and what you do and what you're passionate about?
Yeah, well, as my dad has mentioned, I am Dave's son. And yeah, so I'm 18. I'm currently doing a gap year with Trent Vineyard, which has been my church ever since I was 3 years old. And I've just been really passionate this year about, really pushing into what God has for me and what the future could hold and laying a foundation for the rest of my life. And a big part of that has always been, I have this weird, I'd say, passion for politics, which not many people have. And I know just God is steering me in that direction. And I'm loving to push into that, and just excited to be on this podcast and be able to give my piece on a number of things. But yeah, it's great.
Cool. So I think the way to kick this off really is, I believe that you've got a few questions that you want to fire my way, and I've got a few that I want to fire your way. And so we'll see how this goes in terms of what comes out of all of this. And so do you want to kick us off? What's your question?
Yeah, well, I'll kick us off with maybe a bit of a lighter one, where I will ask, how do we cultivate a daily rhythm of prayer and worship in such a busyness of life?
That's a really good question. Really good question. How do we cultivate a rhythm of prayer and worship in our daily lives? Well, I think there's a number of ways in which we can do that. And I guess I can only speak about my own way because and maybe touch on a few others. But for me, I believe that prayer isn't and shouldn't be a time whereby you just like set aside time to pray. That is important, of course it is. So like when you wake up in the morning, you might, set aside time to pray, and that is absolutely brilliant and spot on. And for some people, I imagine that that's the only time that they do pray. And for others, it might be later in the day when they're brushing the teeth. It varies in terms of when people do that. And that's all good. But I think what Paul was getting at in particular is when he said that we should pray without ceasing. That gives the idea that we're praying constantly. And I think that there is something about that, certainly for myself, that in my daily rhythms that I'm constantly asking the Holy Spirit for his guidance. I'm asking for what he thinks about certain things, what's the right thing to do. Because as we've had a discussion before in the past, there's a difference between doing right and doing good.
Yeah.
And doing good might be good for me or good for someone else, but it's not the right thing to do. And so my heart really is to try and find what the right thing to do in any situation is. And so my heart posture is asking God what the right thing is to do. And that's a daily thing. And that's a cultivated thing. That didn't happen overnight. That's an intentionality whereby I'm going to be intentional about asking God into these certain areas of my life. And worship, I think, plays directly into that. So, I'm often listening to worship music or gospel rap music, as you know, in the car.
Well, let me interrupt you. What's your favorite worship song? I've got to ask that.
Oh, wow. Currently, my favorite song is the one that you put me onto.
No Greater Love.
No Greater Love. Who's
Nemo
that by?
Blaze and Joel Barnes. Great artists. You should check them out.
It's a big tune. You should check
it out.
It's great. So that is like my favorite tune at the moment. But going back to what we were saying, I'm often listening to worship music in some shape or form. And I think that helps position my heart for worship and for praise, but also in a place of like engagement with the Holy Spirit throughout the day. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. And that's great, because I know for me, like, a big part of it was introducing worship into what I'm listening to. And like, you know, what you take in is what often you put out.
Yeah.
And so a big part of mine was like, I remember looking at my Spotify Wrapped, and a bunch of this was back when I was just into sixth form, and my friends were like, you had Amazing Grace in your top, Chris Tomlin, Amazing Grace in your top 5 on Spotify. I was like, yeah, it's great tune. I was like, why can't they all be that? And not that I purposefully like would stick songs on and not even listen to them just to get them on my Spotify Wrapped, but the entirety of my Spotify Wrapped this year was worship music.
That's cool.
And like, not to say I'm proud of it, but I am. But I just thought like, let's implement it into daily.
Yeah.
And so like, even to this morning whilst I was at work, I was listening to worship music, even though someone was playing something through the speakers, some interesting music choices. But I chose to stick my AirPods in and listen to worship music. And I think that's like a really important part about cultivating it rather than just trying to switch it like that, because often that's not how it works. And to touch on the prayer point as well, I heard a story about someone who went for a walk once and they didn't know where they were going, and they just decided, I'm going to ask God at every turn whether I'm going to turn left and right. And they did. And then they end up turning one way, and they end up coming across this really beautiful like spot, which they didn't even know existed nearby where they lived, all because they asked God very simply, which way should I go? And he showed them part of his beautiful creation. And that's just such a little thing which you can implement. I'm doing a lot of walking at the minute, and like just trying to ask God, like, which way am I going to go, instead of planning like, I'm just going to walk that way because that's the easiest or quickest way. Which then that practice can then, you know, the path of life we're on isn't going to always be the easiest and quickest way, but when we ask God which direction to go, and he shows us, we come across his beautiful creation and what he's got for us.
That's really good. So right back at you, what's your top worship track at the moment?
Oh man, you've asked the wrong person, because there's loads. I have to say I do love Josiah Queen. I don't know if you listen to him. I'm actually going to go see him next week, which is going to be pretty cool. So I do love a lot of his tracks. One of his tracks is I Am Barabbas.
Okay.
Which
you haven't put me onto that one yet.
Well, you haven't been listening when I'm singing in the shower, have you?
Fair.
Gosh, Fair. That's how you got the that's how you got the other one.
That's true. That's true.
Yes, that's one of mine. What else? I guess worship wise, How He Loves, David Crowder. That version is just really beautiful song, and that's been on repeat recently. And Amazing Grace as well. That's just still such a tune.
So sticking with the topic of like music at the moment, how do and you know, I am proud of the fact that you have quite an eclectic taste of music, and I'd like to think that that's partly down to me. Whether it is or not, I don't know, but I'm going to own it anyway. But like, you tend to listen to like a varied amount of music in the sense of different genres, different styles, like even from the like 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, noughties, even to present. But how does that have an impact in terms of your worship or your walk with Jesus? Because there's some people that would say that secular music is perhaps not good to listen to if you're trying to follow Jesus, especially with a lot of the stuff that's out there currently. How does that work for you?
I think for me, I've always been very good at this, like having a distinction between like, is this genuinely causing me to worship something other than the Lord, or is this just a cool tune that I'm listening to and it doesn't actually have much of an effect? And my discernment in that has grown to the point now where I'll hear a lyric and I'm like, let's remove that from the playlist, because I'm like, I don't agree with that, and I don't want to listen to music that's going to have an influence like that. And it's especially present when, so I'm brand new to youth leading, but I'm doing some youth leading, started this year, and they always ask to play like songs which I'm like, we're just not going to play that in youth. But like, go back like 5 years and I would be someone in youth who would be like, play that song. And it's like, no, but it's right to be discerning about that, and to have in your mind the same goes for TV programs, movies, things like that. I watched the show Lucifer, and I wouldn't watch it again, because even though it is a little bit ridiculous and completely unrealistic, I was able to make that distinction. But then it gives you almost this softened, that Devil's quite a nice guy, like he's just a cool dude. And it's like, no, I don't like that. And so just like being, and I guess it comes with experience and time. I'm sure you're probably even more knowledgeable about this than me. And it just takes a bit of time just to realize actually that's probably not healthy, because it's even like with sports can get carried away. And it's like, I saw someone once represent it as when you're worshipping, you're doing this. When you're worshipping, you're doing this, or what, and you're jumping up and down and stuff, and that's great. But what about the football? When you're doing this, you're doing this, and you're singing songs. Is it not the same? Or you're not worshipping the football then? Just a little thought, and gets your brain thinking, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's an interesting thought, isn't it? Because, like you say, sometimes we're a little bit reserved when it comes to worshipping Jesus. Even when like he's answered prayers and done a number of things, we can still be quite reserved, I think.
Yeah.
But like we can go to a football match and someone can score and it's like, who are you? The kind of like the liveliness and all of that comes with it. It's like two different people. And I think that they're honest questions to be asking ourselves, not like to, put judgment on people or anything like that. But I think they're good questions to ask, that why am I so ecstatic about that and not so ecstatic about, the creator of the universe that does like wonderful and amazing things in my life. But also with the music thing, I think that's really good and really wise, because I think certainly, and I'm, as you know, I do music and I'm a musician in some respects, but I realized that a lot of the music, especially now that people are listening to, is not helpful for our spiritual formation. And the reality is that a lot of it, or some of it maybe, sounds really good, sounds great. But when you pay attention to what they're actually saying, it detracts from the fact that it sounds great, because what happens is it enters the soul, I believe. And then you start regurgitating the lyrics, and then before you know it, it becomes a part of your lifestyle. And then it's what's on the inside comes out in some way, shape or form. And so if you're filling your heart and your mind with like secular stuff, which is unhealthy, then I'm not sure that that's a good thing to do, because at some point it will, leak out, or it will have an impact at least in terms of our thought process and how we feel and all of that. And I'm not at all saying that we should stop listening to all secular music, because I like to listen to some. I like to hear what's going on at the moment. But like you said, there's certain tracks that I hear and I'm like, it's like my spirit says, no, no. And I can't abide by it. And so I have to turn it off and put something else on. And I think that, if we're serious about our discipleship, and we're serious about following Jesus, then it's a holistic approach that we have to take. It can't just be in certain aspects of our lives, because effectively what we're saying is, I give you this part of my life, Lord, but the music part and this part, well, I'm going to hold on to that a little bit, and when I'm ready, then maybe I'll give that up. He's calling us to complete surrender. And so that means that everything's up for grabs. And so we have to process what those things are in terms of what God might be telling us to put aside or lay aside for him. What are your thoughts?
Well, I was going to throw a question back at you, which is, do you think that some people take it too far and they think like all secular music is demonic? And do you think like almost like where do we draw the line in that?
Yeah, great question. No, I don't think all. Well, there's minutiae and levels to that question, in the sense of, you could say that anything that is not of God is demonic, because there's two powers in the world, there's good and there's evil, and you're in one camp or you're in the other. So there's one level of that, but there's another level whereby I think that Paul said that be in the world but be not of the world. And so the reality is if you walk into Primark or you walk into any shop, you're going to hear secular music playing. And what you're going to do, walk around blocking your saying la 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 la, because you don't want to hear it. You can't really do that. And not all of it is bad. Some of it is good. Some of it is good stuff. Some of it undeniably sounds amazing. And some of the stuff that they're talking about, are life experiences that people can identify, which usually makes it a hit or a good song. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I do think there is something wrong if there is a disparity between secular and the gospel or Christian or worship music that we're listening to, because one has to outweigh the other. And whatever you're listening to is going to have an impact on how you're becoming. So if you're listening to gangster rap, for example, that's going to have an impact.
Yeah, of course it is.
You know?
Yeah.
And, you know, just take someone to push your buttons and all of a sudden you're all gangster and you're ready to deal with it in an ungodly way.
You heard it in a song.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially if you're listening to it over and over again, because it kind of does something to you. Music has the power to, that's why when David was sick, he got a musician to come and play to soothe his sickness. Music does something. And so if secular music has got more of a hold on us than Christian music, then I think we need to address that.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's why I love artists like Forrest Frank, Josiah Queen, Caleb Gordon, just to name a few of them, who are trying to create music which is worship, but not like to be sung in church. If you get me, to be implemented into the charts, into the secular world, so that there may be transformation within that. And you see like the blow up of Forrest Frank on TikTok, especially. I'm not personally on TikTok, but I remember when I was, that he like one of his songs took off, and it's like, that's awesome to see. Oceans, the worship song, is still widely used across like social media platforms. And like music, people find power in music, and if we can get them with Christian music, then we can really like expand the kingdom through that. And I think that's also awesome what you do with your music, is that your music sounds cool. It's not like naff music, and it also is glorifying God in what you say and sharing life experience.
Absolutely. And I think, last point before we move on from that one, I think that there's merit in that, especially for young up and coming artists that are Christians, that I don't think it needs to be Jesus, Jesus in every single line. I don't think that. My music certainly isn't. But I do think that there has to be, like, they have to have morals, and they have to have ways of life that are good, that are taking perspectives from the Bible, because they're universal. If we take those, you know, the Bible, you know, has the instructions for life in many respects in terms of how we should live. And so if we can take those concepts and put them into music in people's everyday lives, that can only be a good thing. And also, because naturally what happens, people want to know more about the artist, which is a way of evangelizing to people and bringing people to Jesus. So let's move on from that. Have you got another question?
Yeah, let me think of what the other one was. It was about, how do we like almost put our faith into practice in a world which is completely almost like numb to it, in a sense, and how do we like carry out our faith in a secular world as such?
Again, he's good at these questions, isn't he? I don't know where he gets them from. I think that's a really good question. And I think that there's something to be said in terms of our authentic relationship with Jesus. And let me try and explain what I mean by that. I think that when someone comes to faith, for example, they're usually really excited about the fact that they've given their lives to Jesus. And, you know, it's exciting. I know it was for me. But then there comes a point where the rubber hits the road, where it's like, you know, I believe in God, but like, I'm not sure how my non-Christian friends are going to react if I talk about God, you know. And so that kind of puts the flame out a little bit that's been burning within us. And I think that it's determined, in response to your question, it's determined by how we pivot from that point. Because I think that that's a natural part, that we're going to feel embarrassed. We're going to feel, you know, not everyone. Some people are like on fire all the way through and can't wait to tell everyone. But for some people, it's like, this is really embarrassing, you know, and I'm not sure I can share my faith with someone else. I'm not sure. The truth be known, when I first became a Christian, people would ask me on a Monday, how was your weekend? And I'd say, it was great. What were you up to? And I'd tell them everything I did apart from go to church. Because I wasn't sure how they would respond to that. And I didn't want them to look at me in a particular way. So I've been there and I know what that's like. But I think that the pivotal thing is, when your relationship with Jesus in your quiet time, prayer time, your spiritual formation, however you engage with God, whether that's through worship, prayer, whatever that is, becomes real. And when that becomes real, it means that it's real not just in your prayer closet, but it's real in real time when you're with other people.
Yeah.
It's real when you're with your non-Christian friends. It's real when you're at the workplace. It's real when you're with your family. It's real, which means that if anyone asks you a question, you're going to answer honestly and truthfully, because he is the way, the truth, and the life. And if you're engaging and subscribing to that, then you can't do anything but speak the truth. And naturally that comes out. And so I think that once our relationship becomes a reality for us, not just in the closet, but openly, then it makes it easier to live out our faith in the day to day. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's good. And I think that's what Paul means when he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel.
Absolutely.
Is it's not like, of course, I think if someone has truly given their life to Jesus, of course they're not ashamed of that.
Yeah.
But what they might be ashamed of is the shame that someone might put on them.
Yeah.
And actually what Paul's talking about is that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, and once you, like you say, once it becomes almost authentic, it's like sometimes you just need a second thing. So I know for me, it was, I got baptized when I was 12. Yeah, I got baptized when I was 12, shared my testimony. I was proper like on fire, just come back from a youth festival. It was like, amazing, get baptized. And then, but I needed something second. And that second thing didn't really come until year 11, the end of year 11, after I'd done my GCSEs. And all of a sudden I'm at the same youth festival, but now like about 2 times bigger than it was back in year 7. And it's like, I just have this re-releasing of like freedom in my faith and freedom in who God says I am. And actually that's where I first start to think about what God might have for me in the future, which is where politics came about. And actually it needed that second thing. I've recommitted my life to Jesus that summer, and it just needed that second thing. Whereas now, like, there's ups and downs, of course. We all have our good days and our bad days. Like I say, some people just always seem to have a good day, and it's like, even in their bad days, it's a good day, and it's like, I don't know how you do it. But I know that second baptism, in a sense, that it felt like I then died again to something else, something that I put over myself, what other people have put on me, dying to having to conform, and actually then being transformed.
Absolutely.
By what it says in
Romans 12, I believe,
15, is it?
Something like that. I can't remember. Be transformed by the renewing.
Yeah, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And there's a bit more to that scripture, which probably provides a bit more context. But yeah, just like almost that people can come to faith and be baptized, and that is great. But it's when you take that step of like not allowing yourself to conform to this world, when you can be transformed, because you allow your heart to open, your mind to open to what God might have for you. And actually that he's not going to let you down. He's got a plan. Even if you go out and you step out and you tell someone about your faith and they put you down for it, like God's still got a plan for you, and he's still got a plan for them as well, that you've told.
So how did that play out for you though, in the sense of like, you know, not being ashamed of the gospel of Christ, in terms of like, you got baptized at 12 or whenever it was, and
Glad you remember.
It was a highlight. But like going back to school and like speaking openly about your faith and all of that, how did that play out for you?
Yeah, and so in year 7 it looked a lot like, I actually had this like action Bible, which was, I still got it, which is really cool. And it was just like a nice way to visualize the Bible. And I actually gave that to my friend to go and read, but he gave it back to me. I was like, I'm not really bothered, to be honest with you, like a week later. And so that kind of like was my first like almost rejection in a sense from that. And then I was really hesitant from that point to even be open about it in school. But actually, as we mentioned with music and stuff, is that, well, that started to get into my head. That started to become a regular thing of where I felt like I couldn't be open about it. And so then I just wasn't. And like, I didn't even try and reach out. So for a lot of my time in secondary school, in fact, I'd say most of it was spent people knowing I'm Christian, but me not being open about that, me not sharing that. And actually me then slipping into friendship groups or people who were probably groups that I shouldn't be a part of, because even though I wasn't involved in gangs or anything like that, but whereas some other people, you know, didn't go that far. But what I did go to a point where I realized these people aren't healthy for me, but I'm just going to stick with it because I'm fitting in. I'm conforming. Whereas then I had a fresh start going to a new school for sixth form. And I think actually that's a big part. Sometimes we do just need a fresh start.
Yeah.
We do just need to go again. And God gifted that to me almost after committing my life to him again. Had this new opportunity with this new school, met new people. Actually, I've never had another Christian in school with me until I get to sixth form, where one of my other friends introduced me to this guy called Charlie. He's an awesome guy. Hopefully he's watching this. And we actually, I was talking, and then my other mate Tommy was like, "Oh, so we're, Charlie's Christian as well and stuff." And he pulls this like Bible out of his bag, and I was like, my eyes lit up. I was like, "No way!" I also then went, "Okay, I've got to be on my best behaviour."
Yeah.
Had to think about like that, but I then step into year 12. I step into the latter years of being within school, and we end up setting up a CU in the school together.
Amazing.
We end up just like being, there's someone else there to be open with, and God gave me this almost fresh start to then be transformed almost by renewing of my mind, in a sense that there was someone else there to keep checks.
And what did that look like in terms of you and Charlie and that journey that you kind of started together?
Well, often, to be honest, it would just be a simple thing of like, how was church on Sunday? Or how is church life for you? And it was just that very simple thing of like reminding me that, like, I guess in a sense, for someone to keep checks on me, almost like silently sometimes, just, oh, Charlie's here. If I say something wrong, then that's going to look worse in a sense. But what it often looked like was just keeping like a friendship together, just keeping regular in contact when we saw each other, and just having someone within a secular space who understood, rather than being surrounded in a Christian culture and then just picking a few friends who are secular. Being in a secular space, but having Christians to be around me, even if it was just one. And I think that's a big part of it, is because, like you say, we are not called to be we are not called to be of this world, but be in it. We can't avoid being in it. A lot of people who, I'm sure, watching this, you work in the secular world, you don't work within a church. And it's a very different lifestyle, I'm sure. I don't know your experience.
Oh, 100%. And
in both.
Yeah,
you've done both.
Yeah. So working in a secular environment, I used to work in education with a lot of teachers that weren't Christians, and some of the things that I believed or whatever, it wasn't easy to speak about those things, and so I didn't like shoehorn conversation to talk about Jesus, but I also didn't shy away from opportunities when they presented themselves either. And I think that that's what it means to be like naturally like Jesus, in the sense of like, because you become a little bit weird, don't you, if you keep talking about Jesus for no random reason.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't want to be that. But also as well, Jesus said, didn't he, that if you deny me, I will deny you before my Father, is what he said. And, take out the before my Father. I just didn't like the idea of denying someone that I love, and that I feel it's like me saying, do you know Caleb? And I'm like, I've no idea who he is. I've never know Caleb who, or do you love your wife? Sarah who? Who's that? It's that same kind of idea, and it is funny and we laugh about it, but the reality is that's what it felt like to me. To deny him was to deny someone that I love dearly and deeply, and I just felt like I can't like, physically there was like an allergic reaction. I can't do that. But again, that comes from an authentic, genuine relationship with Jesus.
Exactly, which is what it all circles back to at the end of the day. And like, we laugh and we joke, but a lot of my friends will say my answer to everything could be Jesus. And you're spot on. Like, let's be sensible in our conversations and not just try and force it in a way. But let's be natural, and let's like know that everything does point back to the cross. Everything does point back to Jesus, to who he is, who he was when he was on this earth, who he still is alive today, and who he is in us and who we are in him.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about of course, the podcast is called The Practice, and it is about practicing the ways of Jesus in our spiritual formation. So tell us a little bit about your spiritual formation. What does that look like? Like, when do you like retreat to spend time with Jesus, and what does worship look like for you, or your engagement with Jesus? Because like we've already touched on the fact that when you were at school and that transition was a little bit ropey between school and then going to sixth form, but then you kind of landed. But like, how have you cultivated your relationship for Jesus to speak freely and honestly about him?
Yeah, and I'll start off being honest, is that like there have been times, and there still are times, where that isn't what we put into practice, and I'm sure that is the same for everyone, because we all fall short of the glory of God. But one thing that I know has been massive for me, and you mentioned it, is worship. And I love music. I kind of wish I picked it at school, because it would have been quite a fun thing to do instead of drama. Don't know what I was thinking, but music is something which I connect to. Music is something which we've mentioned as well, is like it goes straight to the heart, and so worship has become a part of just everyday life for me. Is I will listen to worship, I will sing worship, I will, like, even walking down the street. I did some walking in the summer as well, where I would just go for worship walks, and I would name them that, and I would just walk by, I'd be worshipping, and like, I'm sure I got some weird looks from people. I did get some weird looks from people, but that was part of like me just fully, like, it almost being in a surrender, being like open freely, that if someone's walking down the street singing Ed Sheeran or something, you'd be like, fair enough. But only because I was singing something which was not usual to them, they probably looked like, oh, what was that? But actually, I then had a bunch of my friends, when I put my little Strava of my worship walk on my story, were like, what's a worship walk? And I was like, great, I can tell you. And they haven't come to church, they haven't completely changed their life for Jesus, but there we go, like we say, we planted another seed. And for me, what that did was it gave me almost like a freedom to talk about it. Is it wasn't like we say, I wasn't forcing it. And it gave me an openness to be like, I'm worshipping Jesus with my song, with my music, in my everyday, and even just the simple thing of going for a walk and worshipping. And so that was one big thing. Another thing would be, I think the word is so important. It has to be the primary, most people would have heard this, but the primary way that God speaks to us is through the Bible, because it is his written word and he lives within those words. And so what I've actually did is I got for Christmas a brand new Bible, which I can highlight, write in, all of that, because I needed somewhere where I can read the word, but when it sticks out to me, then mark that. And I think that's a very recent thing which I've been doing. So I've been going through Proverbs at the minute, which is a lot of highlighting, because it's like, you know what, you're so right. That's just like spot on. Wisdom, wow, mentioned about 20 million times in Proverbs, but it's all good, because it's starting to create an image of my mind, especially of what looked like being a man of God looks like. Because it was, a lot of them were David, if I'm not mistaken, David writing to his sons, or Solomon writing to his sons?
Proverbs, Solomon,
yes. And so I was like, he talks a lot about being like a man of God, who we should be, how we should be, who we should be, and what we should do. And that was like, that's a great place, if you're wondering for a place to like gain wisdom, start there. But a big part of that was the word, and just having a place where I can just put my head in it, even if it's like 5 verses, even if it's 1 verse a day. It is something as simple as that, which can transform it and transform your life, because the words in there are transformative. And also the words in there, get them in your heart and in your head, because when you know scripture, you've got an answer for everything.
Interesting. And that's all great stuff, and I love what you said. But something, maybe, but out of everything that you just said, it was like the 2 seconds of what you said, where you said that I'm not quite there yet. And I think that is really important, because especially like with podcasts like this and stuff, it's very easy to give the impression that we've got it all sorted, that we're like Jesus and I, like we're the closest than anyone. You guys all need to wait in line because it's really about me and Jesus, that kind of thing. But the reality is that everyone has their struggles, and everyone has their their battles, especially in doing the stuff that we're talking about. And I think it's important to highlight that stuff that, you know, I think that the idea is that the reality is that we're going to make mistakes. You're going to get things wrong. And I think it's important to state that Jesus is your biggest fan, your biggest cheerleader. And like, you know, when we make mistakes, often we're hard on ourselves, but he's not hard on us. He's the one that's saying, okay, we can do it. You can do it. Up you get. It's like if a child is learning to walk and they fall over, you never hear, or you should at least never hear, a good father saying, you stupid, pathetic little boy, what do you call that, walking? You never hear those words. What you do hear is, okay, up you get. You can do it. Here we go. You can go. Come on. You can do it. And that's the encouragement of a good father. And so, you know, whether you've got this down or you've fallen over and you've made mistakes, Jesus is there cheering you on and telling you that you can do this. And so my encouragement, our encouragement really is to pick yourself up and to go again. Be honest with yourself and be honest with your mistakes. Don't try and sweep them under the carpet. Don't try and bury them, because that gives the enemy a foothold in your life, but actually expose it and be honest about it and then move forward. And that's why having accountability partners and being a part of a small group where you can talk honestly is so key, because that helps with our spiritual formation. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, and that's like spot on. Is like, it's how you apply yourself in your faith. It's not like, I know I can be quite a culprit for beating myself down, for being like, oh, stupid, like why would you, like, oh, I didn't read my Bible today, like, and getting at yourself for that. And I know that's not just me. And my encouragement would be the amount of times that I've had to pick myself up. I've had to almost, like, sometimes it would be someone else picking me up, which is why small group accountability is so important, because that's where other people can step in when you need it. But often it would also just be the encouragement of the Holy Spirit within me, where you feel like, no, we can, like, tomorrow I'm going to push into that as I'm in bed before I go to sleep. And to have this almost like recognition that, like you say, Jesus is championing you on, like, you're not just like toys that he's playing with. And it's like, oh, we'll just knock you over for that and see how you deal with that one. He's like, when you do fall over, he's like, come on, let's get back up and let's keep going. And I've had 18 years of life picking myself back up at times. I'm sure you've had even more experiences and many moments and stories which we could spend ages talking about. But the main thing is that he is right there with you in that. And he's actually also, like the word says, he's gone before you in that. He knows, like, don't try and be like, oh, now I have to come to Jesus again with this. He's like, he already knows. He just wants you to tell him so that he can then be like, come on, this is where we're going now.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that as well, I think that often many of us, we struggle to be honest with ourselves, which therefore means that we struggle to be honest with the Holy Spirit. And I think it's in our honesty that the freedom comes. When we make mistakes, we don't want to tell anybody about it. We want to hide it and so forth. But mistakes are meant for learning, not repeating.
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to say that again to this camera, that mistakes are meant for learning, not repeating. And the idea behind that really is that when we make mistakes, like Caleb was saying, is that we bring them before the Lord and that we're honest, or even tell someone about it. And the idea is that when we tell someone about it, we're shining the light on it. And so it loses its power, but it also means that we're going to try and be intentional about not making that mistake again. And that's how we grow in our spiritual formation. You know, we can't go through life blindly just thinking, oh, I'm going to make a mistake and it doesn't matter, I'm not going to tell anyone, you know, I'm just going to go on, because we can hide in the darkness. But actually, when we bring light to it and we expose it, then there is nowhere to hide. And then what happens is we shouldn't want to hide either, because being in his presence is loving, it's forgiving, it's gracious, and it's kind. And we want to please him. And we know that what he wants for us is always better than what we want for ourselves. So therefore, I'm going to live intentionally in my discipleship and learn from my mistakes so that I can become all that Jesus is asking me to be.
And like, just to add on, that's where accountability is just so important as a disciple of Jesus, is that actually also accountability means that someone is there to encourage you as well. It's not just there to, because if your accountability is if you are coming out of that meeting, coming out of that chat with someone worse off than before you went, then you're not, that's not accountable.
Yeah.
Because you're either holding something back or they are condemning you for what you have shared with them.
Yeah.
And so I'll just say, like, that isn't correct accountability.
Yeah.
What is correct accountability is being open and fully honest with someone else. You know, the Bible says, confess your sins to one another and you shall be saved.
Yeah.
It is being fully open to someone else who you trust and whom God trusts for you to be accountable to, who can then be like, mate, but like, I fully understand you, or mate, I don't understand, but like I empathize with that, or mate, like, I'm sorry, that sucks. And sometimes that's all it needs, just and then to be like, let's someone to pick you up, someone to almost act like Jesus and be like Jesus in a way, to be like, come on, let's put some steps in, let's journey in this together, and let's encourage each other, rather than just like, oh man, like, again, really? Because that's not right. And so if that is a position that you're in, then I'd encourage you to like find proper accountability, because that is so freeing. And I know that personally, that proper accountability is so freeing. Yeah.
So we're coming to the end of the podcast, and I just wondered, Caleb, if there's anything else that you want to say to the listeners and those that are watching about, you know, that might be struggling a little bit with their faith, in particular those that may have made like, or they perceive that they've made like a colossal mistake, like, how can God forgive me of what I've done? You know, what would you say to those individuals that are struggling with that level of acceptance from Jesus, even though they may have messed up?
I'd first say, like, I feel you, because that's a position I've been in many a time where I feel like, oh no, like, that's beyond God's grace. And nothing's beyond God's grace. I mean, you've probably heard it, but when you realize that, then it doesn't give you the freedom to go and make any stupid decision you want, and you're like, oh, I could just come back to God and it'll be fine. But what it does do is give you a freedom of your past, and no longer does that have a hold on you. What it does is that it then frees you to go step forward into the future and to journey with Jesus, and to then go and sin no more. I mean, we're going to sin and we're going to make mistakes, but to then go and, like, intentionally, like we say, mistakes are there to be made, not repeated. And so what I would say is that nothing is beyond God's forgiveness. And actually, for someone who might be struggling with someone else who has hurt them, and you're like, how can I forgive that person? Is like, I've been and continuing in a similar journey of that, where you just can't almost see past that. But an encouragement to you is that God is above everything else. There is nothing beyond his grace. It's like a blanket that covers even beyond what we can imagine. And to realize that is to, like I say, have freedom. And to realize that is to walk in and step into what God has for you. Because if you're bound by a grudge over someone, if you're bound by unforgiveness, if you're bound by self-pity, if you're bound by anything else that relates to that, then you're just not going to be able to experience a life and a life to the full. Whereas as soon as you, and it could be, sometimes it can be a quick thing like that. Sometimes people are set through like that, but often it's a process. Like we've mentioned, Bible, get that in your head, read your Bible, prayer, connection with God. I mean, what else can you do if you can't do anything else? Pray, you know, worship, like we've mentioned, all these things which then become a rhythm of your life. And all of a sudden you realize that doesn't have a hold on me anymore. And it comes to a moment where you're like, whew, and you can relax.
That's really good. Well, we're coming to the end of the podcast, and some of you that have been tracking with me, you'll remember that we started something a couple of episodes ago, whereby I ask each guest to leave a question for my next guest. And you might recall that I had a conversation with the lovely Joan Carter about therapy as a Christian therapist, and I asked her to leave a question for Caleb, and so this is your question.
Oh, here we go.
Are you ready for it?
Oh yeah.
Joan asked, which life experience stands out as one that has enabled you to grow your trust in God?
It's a really good question.
It is a very good question.
There's many. There always is going to be, and I'm sure you've gotten plenty more than me, as more experienced in life you are. But what I would say is one is my A-level exams, and what like a stressful time. Those who have done exams before will know that even the calmest people are stressed by exams. And I was hanging on by a thread with especially my chemistry, and it was like, I've got to get this grade to be able to get into the uni that I want to. And what I didn't do is something that I did with my GCSEs, which was disconnect from church and God. I stayed plugged in. I stayed connected to God and my Bible and my church. And then we come to my results after doing the exams. Phew, let's see what we get. I get the exact right grades to get into the uni that I want to. But not only that, now that God has changed the plan, or now that God has shown me the other plan that he's got for me, the one that I thought was right, and now there's a new one to go to a different uni, the grades I got are the exact grades that I need for that course as well. And so God has shown me there that he is faithful, and he will walk me through it. He's not just going to leave me to it, and I'm not going to have to grind and graft by myself to get there, that he's actually pushing me along and he's with me in it.
Amazing. Brilliant. So I'm going to give you this at some point so you can write your question for our next guest.
I'll get thinking.
That's a great answer, actually, by the way, as well. So thank you for that. And so that's the end of our podcast for today. And just again, thank you everyone for tuning in and following us. And, we really appreciate all your comments. So please do like and subscribe. We've got more stuff coming with some incredible people. And so I'd love for you to continue this journey with us as we continue to practice the ways of Jesus. See you on the next episode.
See you later, guys.